And so, in the chaos of all of this, two political parties made an alliance and called for a revolution. A lot of people don't know this. Number one, a wing of the Social Democratic Party, the wing calling itself the Bolsheviks, were part of this, and the other party that allied with them to make the revolution was a party representing the poor peasants. It was called the Socialist Revolutionary Party. And these two small parties merged together for an alliance, called for a revolution, and to everyone's surprise, theirs too, they succeeded. The old government, the Tsar, fell, and a new revolutionary government took over. And it was heavily influenced by the leaders of the Bolshevik Party, who in turn had been influenced by Marxism. They were students of Karl Marx, they had read all that stuff, they had learned about socialism from Western Europe, and they were determined to build it in Russia. Here's some things they did that may surprise you. The revolution's slogans were bread, peace, and land. The first thing they did was take the land of Russia and hand it out, and this is crucial for you all, as private property to the individual peasants of Russia. The notion that the Soviet Revolution was a revolution against private property is false and wrong, and comes out of that Cold War hysteria. They weren't opposed to private property. They gave out property as private property on a scale no one has ever equaled since. They created the independent farmer who owned his or her own land. Extraordinary. They also declared, extraordinary, that people would be provided, as part of the government's commitment, the revolutionary government's commitment, with guaranteed food, guaranteed housing, guaranteed education, guaranteed medical coverage. You get the picture. It was a socialist revolution. Over the years that followed, they tried to implement all of this with successes along the way and failures along the way. It was an experiment. They were flying by the seat of their pants because no one had done this before, let alone in a big country, let alone with a history of poverty and backwardness and ignorance that had developed in a country like Russia. They quickly discovered, as they rebuilt after the war, after the revolution, that they had enemies, and the enemies affected them deeply. Again, for those of you who don't know, in the immediate aftermath of the revolution, 1917, they were invaded by 4 countries who tried to put down the revolution. The 4 countries, all of whom sent troops that landed in Russia to fight the new revolutionary government: France, Britain, Japan, and the United States. Just a little footnote. The United States landed troops on Soviet soil. The reverse never happened. You can ask yourself, who's entitled to be afraid of whom, given that history? At the same time, a civil war developed inside Russia between those who supported the revolution, the Red Army, and those who were opposed to it, the White Army. I'll leave you to guess who the invading armies sided with, the White Army. And to everyone's surprise, including the leaders of the Red Army, and you might be interested in the name of the man who was given the job of organizing and leading the Red Army, the man's name, Leon Trotsky, whom you may have heard of. To everybody's surprise, the Red Army won, the White Army was defeated, the Civil War was over, and the foreign troops were pushed out. The last Japanese troops leaving Russia in 1922, 5 years after the revolution. So now we have a country that's very poor to begin with, that has just lost a world war, gone through a revolution, gone through a civil war, gone through a foreign invasion. They're destitute. The achievement of the Soviet Union, which has to be understood, is that it went from that level of destruction in 1917 to 22, so that 50 years later, in the 1970s, Russia had become the second most important superpower in the world, second only to the United States. That kind of economic comeback and economic growth, because they also suffered in the Second World War when Hitler invaded them. If I had more time, I'd do much more history. But what I want to stress is they went to work to overcome poverty. That was their number one goal. That's what the number one leader for most of these years, Joseph Stalin, was committed to. In the name of building up their industry, they did a number of things. They collectivized agriculture. The land they had given to the people, they took a good bit of it back. They left them with some, but they wanted to create a modern agriculture. The government took over industries to make them work very hard. They built up their machines. They built up their industrial base. They didn't spend a lot of effort on consumer goods, which is why in the Soviet Union they were behind the West when it comes to standards of living. So they worked very hard to come out of poverty and to become an important power. And they had to, because they were surrounded by countries that invaded them, hated them, opposed them, threatened them, and so they built up their military, for which they needed an industrial base. They couldn't buy their weapons, they had to produce them. They couldn't buy their ships and guns and tanks, they had to produce them, and they didn't have the economy at first to do so. So they went on a kind of forced industrialization march led by the forcible leader, Stalin. Civil liberties thrown to the side. Individual freedoms repressed. Absolutely, that's a critique of what happened there, but it's important to understand why it happened and in the service of what it happened. It's important to balance the criticisms of what they did, the price they paid, with what it was for. And therefore, it's important for me to stress to you that the achievement across the 20th century, from 1917 when the revolution happens to 1975, a crucial year in Russia, was an achievement of economic growth that had never been equaled by such a large economy in such a short historical time.